As we embark on the 50th anniversary of the Syracuse Eight, I would like to commend their sacrifice and courage. Greg Allen and Joe Ehrman, coming back with different perspectives. What we can learn from their experiences and their current perspective based off of all the things that have happened here in 2020. Our continued commitment to improving the student experience at Syracuse University is unmatched, and we welcome the opportunity to hear from our fellow alumni.
Thank you for joining us tonight. As we begin our program, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral land Syracuse University now stands. First, on behalf of the Syracuse Athletics family, I wish all of you, your families, and loved ones good health and personal safety during this challenging year. A special recognition and thank you to the Syracuse Eight, in particular to Greg Allen for his participation tonight, and other Syracuse Eight members in the audience, including John Loban, Alif Muhammad, Bucky McGill, and Ron Womack. A warm welcome to Joe Ehrman and Barra Jones, and thank you both for your participation. Thank you to Rachel Vassell, Assistant Vice President for Multicultural Advancement, and her team, along with my teammates and colleagues, Salatha Wills, Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Culture, and Climate, and Andrew Goodrich, Deputy Athletics Director and Chief Marketing Officer. The 125-year history of Syracuse University Athletics is marked by milestone events, individual and team accomplishments. The Syracuse Eight is a very, very important chapter in our history. Like any organization, Syracuse University Athletics is far from perfect. In terms of racial and social justice, there have been times when we've been leaders and times that we've fallen short of the ideals and goals of both athletics and the university. In researching university archives, Joseph Edward Trigg is recognized as the first Black student athlete at Syracuse, lettering in football in 1914 and 15, and rowing in 1915. Mohammad Sadat Singh originally came to Syracuse on a basketball scholarship. Legend has it that after his sophomore season, Roy Simmons Sr., yes, that Roy Simmons Sr., was an assistant football coach at the time, saw Singh throw a football 55 yards. He asked Singh to become the lead halfback in the single wing offense, better known today as quarterback. Singh played both football and basketball in his final 2 years at Syracuse. After the U.S. entered World War II, Singh applied and was accepted as a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, the only Black unit in the U.S. Army and Air Force. Sadat Singh's life was taken far too early when the engine of his plane failed during a training mission. Bernie Custis was the starting quarterback at Syracuse from 1948 to 1950. Upon graduation, he joined the Hamilton Tiger Cats of the CFL and is widely recognized by historians as the first Black quarterback in professional football. Jim Brown, Ernie Davis, and Floyd Little created the famed 44 while playing under Ben Schwartzwalder. Jim should have won the Heisman Trophy in 1957. He didn't because of racism. But Jim blazed the trail for the Elmira Express, Ernie Davis, who helped lead us to our only national championship and was the first Black student athlete to win the Heisman Trophy in 1961. Floyd Little is a member of the College and Pro Football Hall of Fames and an even better person. And let us all send our prayers to Floyd, his wife Deborah, and the entire Little family as Floyd battles cancer. God bless you, Floyd. God bless your family. The Syracuse Eight was actually 9 young men who had the courage and bravery to call out shortcomings within the football program and athletics administration. They took the bold action to boycott, to protest, and demand change would benefit not only them, but all of their teammates. Better medical care, better academic support, and a request to integrate the coaching staff. The actions these men took ultimately resulted in necessary and appropriate change that benefited all our football student athletes. Now, when they boycotted in 1970, they did so in what was a very tumultuous time across our country. The widely divisive Vietnam War was still being waged. Anti-war protests were held on college campuses in cities across the country. On May 4th in 1970, 4 Kent State University students who were protesting the war on their campus were shot and killed by members of the Ohio National Guard. Racial unrest was rampant across many cities throughout the states. And Syracuse University was similar to many campuses across the country, experiencing several days of anti-war protests. Also in 1970, when the most significant games in the history of college football was played. On September 12th, USC played at Alabama. At that time, the state of Alabama was locked in a bitter primary race for governor. George Wallace, who was the incumbent and a segregationist, waged what political experts still call one of the dirtiest campaigns ever, and he was ultimately reelected. As for the game, USC had a black starting quarterback, and both running backs were black. The Alabama football team was all white. USC defeated Alabama that day 42-21. The next year, when the schools met again, Alabama was no longer a segregated football team. 1970 was a year that challenged and changed our country and our university. That was the backdrop in which the Syracuse 8 made their brave, courageous, and historic stand. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Vera Jones. Vera is a graduate of Syracuse University who earned a degree from the Newhouse School. Vera was a scholar athlete at Syracuse and epitomizes the best of our university. A multi-talented, incredibly versatile communicator, Vera has a distinguished career in radio and television, and I was fortunate to work with Vera at ESPN while she was covering the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship. Vera has worked for Fortune 500 companies and other leading companies in leadership training and coaching, and is also the author of multiple books. Please join me in welcoming Vera Jones.
Thank you so much, John, our awesome athletic director, and also to Coach Dino Babers for opening things up tonight. Immediate and tremendous thanks also to the Syracuse University Office of Multicultural Advancement and Syracuse University Athletics for bringing us all here to experience not just a panel discussion or a historical forum. Tonight, you're going to be treated to a real conversation of reconciliation. I'm blessed and honored to be a part of this important night, and I thank all of you who have decided to join us for this special event. By standing true to their convictions, 9 men called the Syracuse 8 in the face of being reviled, ridiculed, dismissed, and scorned, courageously sacrificed their college careers and future professional athletic opportunities and forced our university to reevaluate itself. They paved the way so that future generations of athletes, including me, could have a fair chance at equity, respect, dignity as representatives of Syracuse University, and proudly say, "Go Orange." So perhaps the most special expression of gratitude tonight belongs to the 9 courageous men known as the Syracuse 8. Richard Bulls, John Godbolt, Dana Harrell, John Lobon, Clarence Bucky McGill, Alif Muhammad, Dwayne Walker, Ron Womack, and right here on our virtual stage, the number 17, Gregory Allen. Greg graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree from the Newhouse School of Public Communications in 1973 and went on to complete graduate programs at Duquesne University, Northwestern Kellogg Business School, and Syracuse University's Graduate School. That's a lot of school. Graduate School of Sales and Marketing Management, smart man. Greg has spent 33 years in corporate America with Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and was one of the founders of Liberty Mutual's Corporate Diversity Network. Greg has served on numerous boards over the years and was awarded the Syracuse University Chancellor's Medal for Extraordinary Courage in 2006. And he was named the Syracuse University Varsity Club Letterman of Distinction honoree in 2009. He is involved in his church and has coached youth sports in his community for many years, winning several championships and coaches awards. Joining Greg is 13-year veteran NFL defensive lineman Joe Ehrman. Joe is an All-American football player named to Syracuse University's All-Century football team. He also lettered in lacrosse. Among many awards, Joe is a recipient of the Arents Award. That is the biggest award at Syracuse University, its most distinguished alumni award. The Baltimore Business Journal selected Joe as the Renaissance Person of the Decade for his dedication and commitment to Baltimore City's betterment. He's been named the National Fatherhood Initiative's Man of the Year and the Frederick Douglass National Man of the Year. Parade Magazine named him the most important coach in America, and the Institute of International Sport chose Joe as one of the most influential sports educators in America. Coach Ehrman's revolutionary concepts of purpose-based football, transformational coaching, and developing healthy masculinity are the subject of the New York Times bestseller, Season of Life, A Football Star, a Boy, a Journey to Manhood. Joe is president of the Inside Out Initiative and also author of Inside Out Coaching, How Sports Can Transform Lives. Before we get to meet these unbelievable, fabulous men for our conversation, please join me in taking a look back at how we got here.
The Syracuse 8 demanded progression within the football program and the athletic department in whole. They advocated for better academic support and medical care, the hiring of a Black assistant coach, and playtime based on merit, not color. But they quickly learned that Syracuse University was but a microcosm of the many issues within the United States during the 1960s, and change would not come easily.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
We are Americans, determined to defend the frontiers of freedom by an honorable peace, if peace is possible.
Despite multiple meetings with the chancellor and other university representatives, progress was slow and tensions continued to mount. And soon, the university would feel the anger through the voices of its student body. Regardless of the findings cited by the committee in their report, their athletic careers and futures were forever altered, and Syracuse University was never the same. The Syracuse 8 boycott was a catalyst for social justice and accountability within the university for the price of their athletic futures, and which can never be repaid. While the story of the Syracuse 8 is one of stolen dreams in the name of racism, it is also a story of forgiveness. Our proud alumni remind us that together, and only together, we are a powerful and positive force that moves ideas, individuals, and society forward. We don't just face the horizon, we chase it, together. After all, that's where our future is. And there's a whole lot of orange in it.
Very, very powerful. Please welcome Joe and Greg. Thank you very much. All I can say is that was very powerful. We're just seeing it, but you lived it. This is the type of thing that gets people teary-eyed and also gets them thinking. I see tonight as being threefold: an examination of history, an exploration of hurt and healing, and an invitation to hope. So let's start with that examination of history. Greg, take us back to the Afro. Take us all the way back to 1960s. What were your thoughts, your feelings? Help us kind of understand what that cultural era was like. You're coming out of Plainfield, New Jersey. You just got your Syracuse University scholarship. Let us live it with you a little bit.
My scholarship to Syracuse, of course, was a dream come true. Like most African-American athletes, Black athletes at that particular time, especially football players, Jim Brown was my hero. Jim Brown, of course, was a Syracuse alum. Along with Jim Brown, as John has already indicated, we had Ernie Davis and Floyd Little and John Mackey and Jim Nance and John Brown. There were so many African-American athletes who had come out of Syracuse. So for me, to get a scholarship and an opportunity to come to Syracuse, of course, which my parents wouldn't have been able to afford themselves, was an honor. It was a blessing. And so I was looking forward to it. But also will take you back, I guess, a little bit as to, as I grew up and tried to understand my culture and where I was and how 1968 was important to me. It was the same year, of course, that Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy got assassinated. So race was in the forefront, discrimination, civil rights. And I knew that I was going to be faced with it at some point in my life, but I didn't know when and where. The reason I knew that was because my father was in the Army. He was one of the original Buffalo Soldiers, 10th Cavalry, 2nd Squadron. He was stationed at West Point. And he and some of his former Army buddies used to come by the house sometimes and start talking and telling stories. And as you know, it was a segregated Army in 1942 until Truman desegregated in 1946. So as I listened to some of their stories, I heard them talk about the fact that they had to, so he was in the cavalry, so they had to train the horses, break the horses, feed the horses, brush the horses, shoe the horses, pretend to be veterinarians. But every time they did it, they had to do it before the officers were allowed to, of course, take their mess first. And so while they were grooming the horses and getting ready, they were getting ready for the officers to play polo. And so as they talked about their stories, they talked about, the insensitivity, the racism, but they also talked about how they were still committed to staying in the Army and fighting not for a flag, but for a constitution. I had another uncle who was also a veteran. I used to listen to his stories. He fought in the Pacific. He fought in Europe. He fought under Patton. He also fought in Korea. Of course, back then they called it battle fatigue. And he went into the Veterans Administration Hospital. I remember going to visit him one time. And I remember looking at his condition, his surroundings, and looking at some of the other white veteran surroundings. And I could tell that there was a difference of how he was being treated. And so those are the kind of things that kind of shaped me going forward. And with the opportunity to attend Syracuse University on a football scholarship, but also to get a great education at a great school, I was elated. And so that's kind of the backdrop of how I attended Syracuse.
Big dreams to go on and become a professional athlete as well. I would guess that was the big thing. That was the ticket out.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. As I said earlier, I had so many role models to look at, and I just knew that Syracuse University was the kind of place that was accepting to African American athletes, Black football players. And I knew that if I was diligent, in my workouts and my commitment to the sport, that I would have a real opportunity to be a professional football player.
Thanks, Greg. Joe, you were a Buffalo guy, not coming too far away, and a big superstar coming out. I don't guess you had a huge afro, but I'm sure you had long hair or something going on back then. Take us back to the 60s with you, Joe. Help us understand what life looked back like for you when you were coming out of high school on your way into Syracuse.
Yeah, let me just say first, the emotions I was filled with watching that video. Looking at how young these 9 men were and thinking about the character and the courage that it took to take the stand that they did. I look at this as a time of great moral failure on my part, of failure as a man, failure as a citizen, and failure as a teammate, and probably more importantly, failure as a brother. So I want to thank Greg for the invitation to join him tonight, talk about who I was, who I am, and the process of getting here. But I clearly was a product of my own culture, growing up still in basically segregated America and segregated Baltimore or Buffalo, really socialized. And I think white people have a tendency to be socialized. We never really learn about our color except in opposition to other people who we're not, which always gives a sense of superiority. There's an implicit bias built into that. So I came to Syracuse University like every other guy on our team, and like Greg just espoused, filled with hopes and anticipations of having that career. But challenging time. If I'd known better, I would have done better. And reflected back, what were the circumstances that created such a rejection and such really animosity, and how our team was divided, both Black and white, and the realization of the white privilege that I had to not have to deal with the issue of race, how it pertained. But looking at those 4 points of the petition of protest there, all of us recognized the improper medical treatment we were getting, inferior, I should say, as well as the need for academic support. So I came to play football. I was confronted on a moral level that I wasn't prepared to deal with, and acted accordingly.
Very good. You just brought up the 4 demands that were on that petition. I'm going to take a look at that real quick just to reiterate: access to the same academic tutoring available to the white teammates, better medical care, I guess, across the board, starting assignments based on merit rather than race, and a discernible effort to racially integrate the all-white coaching staff. You were looking to have a Black staff person. Greg, can you elaborate a little more on the collective? Well, before we even get to the collective decision to come up with the petition, what was your experience? Was there a defining moment for you? So you're at Syracuse University, and then all of a sudden you experience what? How did it get from dreams of greatness to something's not right here?
I'm going to answer that in 2 parts. I'm going to start with the most significant experience that had the most significant change on me and in my life, and prompted me, to a boycott. In early 1970, there was a Black Studies program at Cornell University, some African-American students at SAS at Syracuse University wanted to start a Black Studies program at Syracuse. I was approached by one of the leaders and asked if I would attend the meeting that they were going to have with the assistant provost. I was asked because they wanted a cross section of students, and they wanted a student athlete to attend. So I was very interested in the idea of starting a student African American Studies program at Syracuse, and so I attended the meeting. I was a participant, but not a leader in the meeting. Left the meeting. 2 days later, I got a call, and I was asked to come down to the Manley Fieldhouse and meet with the coach. I assumed that the call was to see how I was doing, how I was progressing in football or my workouts, and was I ready to play spring ball. And so I was encouraged by it. So I went down to the coach's office and was ushered in by the secretary. I sat down, and he was sitting at his desk, and I remember this vividly. He kind of peered over his glasses, and he looked at me and he says, "What's this I hear about you and this black crap?" He used the racial epitaph, but anyway. And I said, "Coach, I'm not sure what you mean." And he said, what's this I hear about you and this black crap?" And I said, "Well, oh, are you talking about the meeting I attended for the Black Studies program?" And I said, "Well, I attended the meeting. I was asked to attend, and I thought it was a good idea, and I'd like to see a Black Studies program at Syracuse." He said, "Well, listen, do you want to be black or do you want to be a football player?" And of course, like anyone, I was stunned. I was both black and a football player at that particular moment. And so I said, "Well, coach, I don't know why I can't do both. I don't know why I can't be black and be a football player. But I know I'm only going to be a football player for a short period of time, but I'm going to be black all my life. And so I think I can do both." And so he told me, "Well, Greg, you got some thinking to do, because either you're going to be black or you're going to be a football player." And that was the end of the meeting. And so as I think back on it now, I guess that was my Black Life Doesn't Matter moment. And that had the most significant impact on me, because I didn't see why I couldn't be both. All my heroes were both in my eyes, and I couldn't separate the two in my own mind. And that's what prompted me to say that, when we had been discussing and talking about it, that I was prepared and ready to boycott. It was significant in another sense too, and I'm speaking on behalf of several of the others. When we boycotted, 5 of us were starters. So this wasn't about playing time or any of that. It was about something bigger than that. Of the 5 that were starters, 2 of us had some of the, what you would call the most prominent positions at Syracuse. I was a tailback. Alif Muhammad was a fullback. This was running back staying healthy and being able to compete was the ideal situation to be in. And so thinking about boycotting was awful tough for all of us. The other incident that happened to me that told me that my experience at Syracuse was not going to be exactly as I dreamed. And actually it happened to me on my first day coming into Syracuse. And I tell this story last because I don't want to give it more importance than it deserves, but it is my initial, I guess, initial idea of what I was getting myself into, or where I was and what was going on, and how it was going to have an effect on my life. I arrived in Syracuse on a Mohawk jet. I grabbed my bags from the baggage claim. The coach is there to meet me. We put my stuff in the car. And as you know, it's not a long ride from Hancock to campus. So we're in the car, and he says, "Greg, gee, glad you decided to come to Syracuse. We're glad that you're here. Too bad freshmen can't play. We think that we could use your talents in a couple places, but while you're here, we want you to get a great education and enjoy yourself. But while you're here, we don't want you to date any white girls. For me, that was the farthest thing from my mind. There were so many more things that we could have talked about. But yet, for him, within the first 7 or 8 minutes of me being in Syracuse, that was the most important thing for him to get across to me. I knew something was wrong. So my reply to the coach was, well, coach, won't they be disappointed? No, I didn't say that. I'm just teasing. That's an attempt at a little humor as we're going through this. It's one of those moments where it's something I thought, I thought of later, but I wish I had said then. But so that's why I said that. But I want people to understand that coming in as a freshman, just out of high school, it was a big moment. So I got to campus and I got to, talk to a couple of the other guys. We were talking, and I mentioned the conversation I had on my way in, only to find out that everyone else had that same conversation on their first day of arrival in Syracuse. So there were other things, of course, that happened between that. That was my first indication, and of course the ultimate situation that led me to boycott. But there were things that happened in between.
Wow.
Such as, well, I'll give you one more. I came to Syracuse as a biology major. In high school, I had taken some advanced biology courses, and I wanted to major in it. And so when I got to Syracuse as a freshman, I was able to take advanced biology. I registered for class, was ready to go, but I had a lab on one day of the week that would interfere with practice. So I approached my coach and I said, hey, I'm a biology major, and I'm going to need to leave practice an hour early, whatever day it was, a certain day, so I can do my labs. It was the only time they offered the lab. So he said, well, you can't do that. You can't take a lab. I said, well, I have to, coach. That's part of my my major. He said, well, we're going to have to change your major. And here, I want you to go down, and I remember the guy's name. See, I think it was Dean Cope, and talk to him. I went down the next day, and I was moved from a biology major to a general ed, which just meant that I was taking general courses that would keep me eligible, not courses that were going to take me anywhere. But through some counseling and help from Alif Mohammed, I was able to enter a Newhouse, and that's where I graduated from. So.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Joe, I'm listening to this and I'm wondering, as Black players were beginning to, first of all, did you have Black players on your team in high school at all? And what was your experience? What was your experience in terms of your relationship with Greg or any of the other players? Or if you can think back, was there some semblance of unity at first? How did that all work out?
Yeah, well, growing up in Buffalo, which is like most of America, city was highly segregated based on geography. Had a number of families, high school classmates that were Black, but without ever the realization that they were all from housing projects. There was no home ownership amongst Blacks at that point in time. So I never considered myself racist, never considered myself having any kind of racial animus, but being very ignorant. And it's funny because I always remember in junior high school, one of the African American girls I went to school with, we had to give who our heroes were in life, and hers was Adam Clayton Powell, who was the first Black congressman from Harlem. I remember thinking, Adam Clayton Powell. I was Mickey Mantle or somebody, I don't know who. Just an ignorance. And again, it goes back to the socialization process. I think we learned about people that we never saw, never knew. never had relationships with. And, you know, I'm kind of amazed as I think back, and, you know, I've done a lot of work on this to get where I am today, but I went all through elementary school. I went all through high school. I went all through Syracuse University, 13 years of professional football, and all through seminary, and never once had a black teacher or a black coach. So I think it was just I won't say privilege, but it was just a total lack of understanding. The things that Greg were talking about, just kind of wanting to believe, I guess, or just naive to really what was taking place. Although it's amazing because, you know, you can imagine what the news was every night in 67, 68, during that era. But nobody ever sat down and taught me. Nobody ever, during all the midst of this, we were never brought together. There was a never process to explain this. I think I come to my own conclusion as I reflected back on this. But in the moment, it just seemed like somehow I was losing something by these guys boycotting. We weren't going to be as good of a team. They were somehow taken away from me. I think our coach divided the team. It became an us versus a them. There was never an educational part. There was never a part to come together and to reconcile. No restorative aspects, actions that I remember whatsoever. And, you know, one of the things I know is that, you know, empathy tracks color. The more you perceive people are like you, the more empathic you are to them. White socialization in America, particularly in my era, although it's not much different to today, I'm sad to say, you learn about others. Again, people you don't know, touch, see, live with. And I think there's a lack of empathy, a lack of awareness, really what triggered this. Our freshman year, I think we all got together very well, but socially we were segregated. But, you know, Greg was, I think everybody had tremendous respect for Greg, and you can see his beautiful spirit now. And that was certainly the case then. But just a lack of anybody bringing people together, intentionally breaking down what has taken place in America and where we've all come from, and no sense of where we wanted to get to together as a team or as a country.
I think you touched on some great stuff that I definitely want to come back to, because I think that is part of the healing. The socialization and lack thereof, as long as you always see somebody else as other and not part of who you are or part of your experience. You know, that we've amygdala in our brain tells us to, you know, fight or flight. It's one or the other, to fear what you don't know. And so I definitely want to come back to that. But as part of the historical, just to get a better grasp, you know, Greg, I wanted to ask, so you're unhappy. You began conversations, I'm guessing, with some of your Black teammates, and you all now are all saying, well, this happened to me. And yeah, and so I'm guessing that is how it played out. But how did you arrive at, you know what we should do? We should put this petition together. We should boycott. I mean, there was no one really advising you, to my understanding, at least from the history books, or was there? What was the process? How did you know that this is what needs to be done?
Of course, we were familiar with, you know, Martin Luther King and the nonviolence, you know, and how boycotts affected change. And so we knew that was an instrument, you know, that we could use. We did have several people like Dr. Johnson, Dr. Willie, Reverend Moody, George Moody, who were assisting us and talking to us. But a lot of it had to do with us just getting together and trying to make a decision. And I don't mean to make this sound too magnanimous, but part of that discussion wasn't about just what was going to happen to us, but what was going to happen to others. You know, how could we, in effect, make change? And of course, we were concerned about our careers. We were concerned about our opportunities. As I said, you know, several of us were starters, and several had opportunities to play. And so it was important. So as we talked, we knew that everyone had experienced some sort of racial discrimination, some sort of racism. And so how do we get someone's attention? At first we thought by, petitioning the coach. Prior to that, that didn't work. So we filed a complaint. I think it was Dana Harrell and Alif Muhammad filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. They talked to the university. The university suggested that we have a team meeting. We also knew in '69 that there were 2 coaching positions that were going to come available in the fall, by the fall. So we, also sent a letter and petitioned that one of those coaching spots be filled by a Black coach. We were told that they would, of course, look at, interview, and look for a Black coach. They did interview a Black coach, but he didn't get the job. He didn't get hired. So they hired 2 white coaches. We then petitioned again, and that's when we were told that we would have a coach for the spring of 1970. And so we were fine with that. But in 1970, that spring, we were, I'll just say, duped. Floyd Little came in, and Floyd was here to take care of some business of his own, but also he had planned on spending several days with us, which he did. But that wasn't what we had agreed to or what we thought the coaches were going to do. They said that we were going to have a coach for the entire spring. And so after Floyd left, we got together and we decided that we had to let the university and also the athletic department and the coaching staff know that we were serious. And so that's when we decided that, the best action to take would be to boycott until we get everyone's attention. So the 8 of us, decided to boycott. There were 8 scholarship athletes who walked off the field, and then joined by another later. But that began the boycott.
Joe, was there ever a time that you had a conversation about, with your teammates, or was there just immediate, can't believe they're boycotting? Was there any discussion whatsoever?
Well, I think I remember just kind of feeling blindsided by the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember an awareness. All of a sudden, these players, a critical part of our team, were gone. And it seems to me, and again, 50-year memory, but it seemed almost immediate hostility. It became almost an immediate us versus them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but I don't ever remember a time we got together. I don't ever remember any kind of healing or movement toward reconciliation or understanding. I think the players, let me just speak for myself, were manipulated by the coach, by the coaching staff, who really had a moral responsibility to all the players. But remember, no corrective action. And I think there was never an understanding or an acceptance of what the needs were. Now, mind you, we had the same academic counseling that was directed toward eligibility. And that was a time in the NCAA, you didn't need to be moving toward graduation. You could take any courses and just have your 2.0. And we all suffered from the same medical staff. I would get a knee injury and immediately left Syracuse to get that operation. So there was never a sense that it was beneficial to us being the white guys. And it was just an immediate failure and breakdown, and no lubrication in the midst of that.
I often wonder, as I was reading through the history, Greg, did you ever, so some historians speculate that the reason why there was that Coach Schwartzwalder took things personally, because again, he had been the coach of Jim Brown, the coach of Ernie Davis, the coach of Floyd Little, and I have Blacks, and why would you, and so did you ever get a sense that rather than to see the big picture of again, against the contrast of what was going on in the time, that maybe there was just some personalization of this thing. Particularly after the report came out, I wanted to read that report, the report of the Trustee, Faculty, and Student Committee on Allegations of Racial Discrimination in the Football Program. The committee concludes that racism in the Syracuse University Athletic Department is real, chronic, largely unintentional, and sustained and complicated unwittingly by many modes of behavior common in American athletics and longstanding at Syracuse University. And it goes on to say the penalizing of these athletes without taking into consideration the broader context of their protests was an act of institutional racism unworthy of a great university. So that kind of is what prompted me to think, could this have just been a misunderstanding that, you know, hey, you're doing this against me personally, and pride? What was the chance that that was part of it?
I believe it. I believe that could be. As we talk and as I think back and I speculate, I know that besides being a world renowned coach and celebrated and decorated coach, he was also a decorated Army officer and a war hero. And I think in the 60s, and Joe can bear this out, athletics was a closed society. The rules that applied to the football team and the football players didn't apply to other students. Some good, some bad. And to us, I think Ben looked at it as insubordination. That these privates, if you will, are petitioning the captain to make change and as we say, make demands. And I believe that did have something to do with it. I don't want to do too much speculation on where Ben was or what he was thinking, because I would like people to read the book. In the book, we don't do any of that. We try not to put ourselves in Ben's shoes or any other coach's shoes, and they must have been thinking, or they must have thought, or this must have been the case. When you read the book, you'll find that it's a book of facts, historical facts, completed by citations. And in that book, we'd like for people to read it, read the facts, and make a judgment and assessment for yourself. And so, yes, I speculate, about how that must have been, but I would agree with that assessment. I think the other thing that and I think, Vera, you and I talked about it before, was at that team meeting where Ben felt a little bit offended that here there were some Black players who had, signed a petition with the human rights saying that there was discrimination. And in that meeting, he talked about the fact that he had been a friend to Negroes all of his coaching career, his life. And he couldn't believe that, we would even think that there was any discrimination on the team. And so I remember him asking Alif Muhammad, who was Al Newton at the time, Al, do we have any racial problems on this team? Now, mind you, Al was a 2-year starter at fullback, wearing the famous number 39, Larry Zonka's former number. There was no doubt, I don't think, in anybody's mind on that team that Alif was on his way to the NFL. It would have been easy for Alif to protect himself and just say, no, coach, I don't know of any problems, but he didn't. He said that there were. And I want to give him a vote for his initial courage in a team meeting to make that statement.
All very, very, wow, just powerful stuff as I sit here and I don't even know. I have so many questions. They're going in so many different directions, but I now that we have a little taste of the history, I guess I really wanted to see whether we could talk a little bit about the hurt and the healing, maybe a little bit about how did we even get here. What was the impetus for Joe and you to have a conversation, and how much time had passed that you didn't talk, and talk about that history a little bit. But also, Joe, I'll point it to you. In your life, you obviously you went through life, but you had some experiences that possibly had given you a change of heart. Can you talk about that, and then invite yourself into why you had to reach out to Greg?
Well, I had all this implicit bias that I had learned, and in the middle of my professional football career, I watched my little brother die of cancer over a 5-month period. That was a transformative experience in my life, where I had been so driven by my own ego, trying to use football to validate myself as a man, as a person, making that way beyond what it normally should be. But I ended up going to seminary after that, and I don't know what year it was, 2009 or so. I was given the Aarons Award by Syracuse University. Now, that was awarded to me for the work I had done in Black inner city impoverished communities in Baltimore. So much of my post-seminary life was spent in Black America and the traditional Black church, where I just got such an eye-opening understanding, not only about racism, the history of America in terms of racism, but I started to do my own internal work. I had to process my own feelings and make sense out of my own life narrative. Now, as I said at the beginning, I look back at this time as a time of great moral failure on my behalf. Transformative work demands self-understanding. You've got to understand your life narrative, how you come to positions and opinions, and why you make choices that you do. You also need self-compassion. And as I said earlier, I would have done better if I had known better. But I found it ironic that Syracuse was giving me this award, honored award for my work in the Black community on behalf of racism, and yet this failure that I had, and I never addressed it. I addressed it in my work, but I never addressed it with Greg or 8 other players there. So in that acceptance speech, I made the statement that in retrospect, the greatest educational moment of my entire 5 years at Syracuse University really came through the Syracuse 8. It was that failure of letting other men, other brothers down, doing the work to try to understand why I was apathetic and indifferent the way that I was, having a corrective. I lived in inner city Baltimore, saw the heroicism of the families in there trying to overcome all these perpetual systemic issues. And so after that, I gave that speech. Greg, in his graciousness, reached out to me. And I believe that was the first contact I had had with a Syracuse 8 person. And then I would, I ran into Bucky McGill, who had an incredible a career in juvenile justice in Virginia. The state capitol in Connecticut, in Hartford, I ran into John Lobon doing economic development. And there was just this awkwardness and this sense of being ashamed and not addressing that. And I think this is part of my own curative healing in this process. And again, I have self-compassion. I try not to beat myself up too much, because I understand this socialization process. And I do this work, and I've done this work for the last 20 years. And realize, as a young boy, grew up in a white community. Right after World War II, we had Japanese, and that became a verb, and Jews became a verb, and colored people was a verb, and all kinds of descriptions. And I had to go back and correct them and make sense out of that. So it really was a Greg, and you can just see his presence and feel it. It was that embrace and warmth, as well as Bucky McGill and John Loban as well. So I feel like I am part of their legacy, of that experience, and doing the corrective inner work, circumcising my heart so I can see the inherent dignity, value, and worth of every human being. And I think this was the time in America we're asking, what is the role of race and class and gender and sexual orientation as it speaks to the inherent worth of every human being? And I think it was through a seminary, through my own spiritual growth, where I could see that and make amends to that. And much of my life work has germinated from that experience with the Syracuse 8 and the courage of these 9 men.
You know, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about there's an F word that we're never supposed to say, but then there's another F word that we really struggle to feel, and it's forgiveness. Greg, can you talk about the role forgiveness? And Joe mentioned his faith as well. You know, what role do two F's, faith and forgiveness, play in just this healing process between the racial divide?
Well, I had grown, of course, after my experience at Syracuse. Yeah, I was I guess, an angry young man for a moment when I left Syracuse, because I left all those aspirations, those dreams, those hopes. And I know it wasn't because a lack of ability. I know it was because of a lack of opportunity. And so when I started to think about my experience, it didn't make sense for me to be bitter about my sacrifice. Being bitter about the sacrifice only diminishes it. And I didn't want to do that. I was proud of what I had done at Syracuse. I was proud that I took a stand, not for myself, but for others. And as you said, Vera, for you. It wasn't about me. It was about making Syracuse a better place. You know, as I was about to attend Syracuse, I did my own little research, and I found out in 1870 that, you know, Syracuse was formed by, I think it was some clergymen. And they formed this college, this school, so that women, indigenous people, and people of color would have an opportunity to higher education. The first class at Syracuse was 43% women, indigenous people, and people of color. So in its charter, in its foundation, Syracuse was a revolutionary, welcoming place. You go back to 1870, how many schools in this country had opened their doors to women, indigenous people, and people of color? Very few. So I knew this was the right place for me. When I had my experience, I knew that somehow Syracuse had drifted from its original charter, its original goals. And we, understanding that, the Syracuse 8, took it upon ourselves to bring Syracuse back to itself. You know, when we got here on campus, it was maybe 2-3% people of color. After that experience, it wasn't just a hiring of a Black coach. It was a university, and I'll give them credit, for taking a look at themselves and saying, yes, institutional racism exists at Syracuse. And we're the type of university and the type of school that wants to make that change. And they began making that change. And so as I was saying, so this idea of forgiveness, well, I first had to forgive the university and forgive that experience. But then, as Joe said, when I heard about the work that Joe was doing, there was instant forgiveness on my part. And that's why I reached out to him. Because I knew Joe just didn't change his mind. he changed his heart.
Mm.
And when he changed his heart, that changed his mind. And I saw the work that he was doing in my community, in Baltimore. And I knew that that was the teammate that I had originally played with at Syracuse before the boycott. And so I reached out to Joe and I wanted to thank him and I wanted to let him know that, you know, I told him, I said, Joe, you've been forgiven decades ago. I couldn't carry that burden. I knew that I had done the right thing. I knew that I sacrificed for a reason. And that was part of the greater good of all human beings, to do something for somebody else. And so, yeah, we all walked away from potential NFL careers and those dreams and aspirations. But as I look at the university now, it was all worth it. As I talk to Joe and listen to what he's done in his life, and if I had an impact in that change, it was all worth it. You know, tonight is it's not just a healing, it's a healing moment, but it's something very special for me. And I'm working on trying not to be too emotional. But in the video, we saw John Lewis, you know, and the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Well, this is almost my Edmund Pettus Bridge moment. To be back here at Syracuse, being able to talk to Joe with this idea of forgiveness, this idea that we're both working toward the same goals. We're both trying to make this a better place, this university, this world that we live in, a better place. He has his work, I have mine, but we're still teammates because we're still working toward the same ends. And so, yeah, with forgiveness, I can't be forgiven unless I forgive. And I don't want to carry the burden of not forgiving. I'm sure I've heard people, and I want to be forgiven. And so I have to forgive Joe, and I forgive him because I know he's changed his heart. It's his body of work, you know, that excites me, you know, and that I commend him for it. And I was going to say this at the end, but I'm going to say it now. I had the opportunity to talk to an indigenous person. We'll call him a sage. And he was giving me a parable. And he said, you know, Greg, each of us have two wolves in our heart. One wolf is a little untrustworthy, sinister, can't be trusted. The other wolf has character, integrity, and compassion. And they're constantly fighting. And he says, which one wins? And the answer was the one you feed.
Right.
And so I choose to feed that wolf, all right, that has integrity and compassion for others. And I want, in this conversation, I want everyone to understand that we can all do that. As Joe said, we all have implicit biases, all right? But we don't have to accept them. We can challenge them. We can change them. We can educate ourselves, all right? We you know, yeah, Joe and I were at two ends of the scale, you know, the North Pole, South Pole. But today we're at the equator. So that's what's important to me about tonight.
I got chills. I need a jacket. Wow. That's so powerful. Joe, I'm definitely coming back to you, but right now is the time that we had slotted to start taking in some of the questions from our audience. We have a fabulous audiences out there. So just a reminder, I encourage you to utilize the chat feature to submit your questions. Actually, excuse me, they wanted to go through the Q&A. There's a Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. You can submit your questions and then they're feeding them into me. And we have one already that came in. First question, what are some of the similarities and differences with protests about race and injustice in sports today versus 1970? And jump in whoever wants to take it.
Well, I'm very excited about the protests that are taking today and athletes using the platform and the position that they have. And it's never been more needed. Back in the time, in the late 60s, there wasn't a dominant threat of the white community in America. There were still unions to support white people, to bolster them up. As those things have become decayed and eroded in this country, we see the rise of white supremacy and neo-Nazism and this hate that's taking place. So, the similarities are that they're men of great conviction that are taken out. And I just look at it and I just wish I'd see more white players getting educated in the locker room on behalf of their Black players and utilizing that role a lot better. We need to be educated. A big part of sports has to be understanding that sports have always been a metaphor for social change in America. Every ethnic group that's ever been ghettoized, sports has created a way out. That needs to be elevated. And we've gone through a period where there was too much personal branding, too much trying to corporate dollars. And it's just great to see the rise of consciousness taking place amongst professional athletes today.
Did you have a aha moment, Greg, like specifically Colin Kaepernick? Did you go, holy smokes,
absolutely.
Here we go again.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there were a couple articles written comparing, Colin Kaepernick's stance and ours. And, before Colin Kaepernick, there was the Syracuse 8. But I think about Colin's stance and I remember the controversy about him kneeling, in front of the national anthem, like he was denigrating the flag and denigrating veterans who had fought. And I tried to do a deep study on that and talk to a couple veterans and a couple other people and wanted to get their ideas and their thoughts. And I came with a couple things. When someone goes into the armed forces, they take an oath. The oath is to defend the Constitution. There's not an oath to go overseas and defend the flag. They're defending the Constitution. All countries have flags, but not all countries have a constitution like the United States, a democracy. Colin Kaepernick took a knee. There was a case back in the late 1970s in Texas. I think it was Texas versus Johnson, where a gentleman burned a flag. And he was arrested and put in jail, and his case finally went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court verdict said that the burning of the flag was considered symbolic speech and not a crime under the Constitution of America. Well, then how meek was Colin Kaepernick's taking a knee to cause attention to a cause that was important to him, social justice and policing in America? It was symbolic speech. It wasn't any denigration of the flag or disrespect to veterans. But it took the kneeling on George Floyd's neck for everyone to pay attention. How many lives could have been saved if we had just taken action on Colin Kaepernick's kneeling versus waiting until George Floyd lost his life?
Well, that was actually one of the other questions that's in here asked. Joe and Greg, thank you very much for your time tonight. How would each of you compare the circumstances of 1970 in the US and the Syracuse 8 boycott to the current Black Lives Matter movement and the athletes' response to it?
Black lives do matter. And sometimes I think it gets redefined as like only Black lives matter. That's not what it's about. It's about America taking a look at the disenfranchisement and the racial inequity, the social justice inequity that happens to Black citizens here in America, and especially Black men and women now. So I think it's important for us to just, I guess when you, okay, all behavior has motive. And we tend to deal with the behavior because it's easy and quick. How much more would we get out of our existence, our role as human beings, our role as citizens, if we took the time to understand the motive behind the behavior? And if we did that, we could get to the root cause of behavior and thus change it. It's not the behavior that we should be focused on. It should be the motives behind it.
There's an extension of this question here that I think is also important, because as you continue to look at how sports plays into the social justice movement, this question continues with, how can leagues, brands, and prominent athletes use their platforms and or resources to make a change in a meaningful, authentic way?
I think LeBron James is a perfect example. LeBron puts his money where his mouth is. I mean, I think about his initiative to open up arenas, to make it easier for people to vote. I look at his company. He's now signed a contract to produce films and movies about race, in America. And to me, he's a hero, soon to be an icon. That he takes it upon himself, and of course, he avoids the slings and the arrows, but yet he keeps pressing on toward the mark. And so, for me, I think if everyone were to take LeBron James as an example, there was so much progress that could be made here in America, especially with athletes, among athletes, by athletes.
I would just add, I think I applaud the athletes today for taking the stand they do, but there's a certain reality. Policies, procedures, statements are already going to get America so far. Racism in America is not going to change until white people that control the institutions, control the policies, until we do our own internal work and look at our own history and narratives here. You just can't change without white people being willing to do the hard work of trying to understand the history of this. Black Lives Matters is a statement of truth, because historically they've never mattered in America from 1619 going forward. Isabel Wilkinson has a book out now, Caste, C-A-S-T-E. She compares slavery, Jim Crow, the world we live in, to the caste system of Hindus. And she also talks about how Nazi Germany, the rise of the Third Reich, studied slavery and Jim Crow in order to figure out how to dehumanize Jews so you could treat them in the way that they're treated. And I think all of us white people that are in the audience today, we know how much prejudice is in our families. We know how much stuff we hear. And there has to be the moral courage connected to an empathic connection to our brothers and sisters to start bringing voice to this. We'll continue to have athletes that are exempted. They're exempted from their blackness while they're athletes, but then immediately thrown back into the mix. So I think there's a tremendous challenge here to white America. We've got to understand the history. It's embedded in both personal and systemic institutions. And then we've got to do our own inner work. All lasting and meaningful change always starts on the inside and works its way out. We can't waste another 100 years. The deprivation here. Communities I worked in were always marked by four things: lack of access to health, failed educational systems, early entrance into juvenile justice, and lack of transferable wealth. There's no wealth. People are born poor, die in poverty, and there's no transference of wealth. White America has had that through the GI Bill, through FH housing, mortgages, and we need to start thinking about and talking about some kind of reparation. And you only get to that when you truly understand. I mean, the word white wasn't even a concept. It's not even a concept until slavery. Everybody that came through Ellis Island were all able to at least claim the nomenclature white. It still separated you from Black and African Americans. So there needs to be a deep understanding of the history. It needs to be taught in civics. And then, as I said, everybody needs to do the circumcisions of their own hearts, understand how much bias and prejudice. And it's subconscious. It's just part of the air that we breathe. So I think athletes have a tremendous role. And I look at the NBA, what a great model they're doing. But it's still going to take that person sitting in the stands, watching the audience. White America has got to come to grips with its own responsibilities and obligations to other Americans.
I'm gonna grab another question here. Was there any time during your fight for equality that you all had doubt and almost stopped with the petition? Greg, that would be you.
Yes. When Jim Brown came to assist us, he sat down with each of us collectively and individually. And one of the points that he made was that if we continued with the boycott, it was almost certain that we would be blackballed from the NFL.
Wow.
For all of us, that was an honest assessment, but one that we, of course, didn't want to hear. And so as we started talking more and more about the boycott, we had to come to the realization that if we continued, that those dreams, those aspirations that we came to Syracuse with were going to be diminished, were gone, or evaporate. And so, yeah, we thought about it. As you know, Vera, I was invited to come back to the team. And I had a decision to make. The other 7 weren't invited back. I wasn't sure what I wanted. I shouldn't say that. I knew that I wanted to go on and play professionally. I knew in order to do that, I had to go back to the team. I also knew that I had an obligation to myself and also my other teammates. So I decided to consult with my father. So I asked my father, of course he was aware of the situation. I said, well, I got invited back to play. What do you think I should do? I guess in a way I was kind of hoping that maybe he would make the decision for me, but he didn't. What he said to me was, son, you're 19. Today you become a man. You need to make the decision that you're going to live with for the rest of your life. I'm not going to walk in your shoes. You are. All I'm suggesting to you is that you look within yourself and do the right thing. And the right thing was not to walk away from my convictions, not to turn my back on my teammates, not to place myself above them, not to place my own self-interest, my dreams were just as valuable as their dreams. And so I told the coaches that I'd come back under one condition, that if they invited the other 7 guys back on the team. And if he didn't do that, then I wouldn't come back. And the reasoning I told him was that we all committed the same offense. If you can forgive me, then you should be able to forgive them. And if you couldn't forgive them, then I couldn't go back on the team.
Yeah, that had to be hard. That was hard. I mean, I can't even imagine. so many things that you had to go through, and now we have a lot of student athletes that are on and listening, and I know they have lots of questions because I see them. I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. I wanted to throw one. I'm going to throw this one because Joe, in your work with transfer, you talk a lot about transformation and the individual, but also, this kind of looks at transformation in college athletics. What should athletics do to ensure that athletes of color are supported? And also, there was another one that's coming at you. So this twofold. Do you feel that the world, and especially football world, has really changed, Joe?
I'm not feel it has changed near as much needs to. I think, again, I just think the amount of prejudice and racism in this country is just almost unfathomable in 2020. I think we've got to do a much better understanding of what the role of athletics is, particularly in high school than in youth sports. It really ought to be about human growth and development, not about creating better football players. It has to be social, emotional, character development of every young person. There needs to be some kind of intentional understanding of social awareness, the role that sports has played and can play. I think we need to elevate this win at all costs kind of culture and mentality. When you bring in a university, when you bring diverse people in, I think you need to take time to educate them, take time to formally introduce them to each other, try to be open and honest. And the challenge in football, and I think in all men's sports, men have this tendency to project some kind of invulnerability. We're not nearly as emotive. We don't bring our emotions, our pains, our hurts, our feelings. Somehow that has to be broken down. We need healthy men. Only healthy men are going to change institutions and this country. So I think male sports, it ought to be about the healthy development of boys into some kind of healthy masculinity, which I define as some kind of self-awareness of who and what you are, that voice in your head, self-management to make sense out of that stuff. We've got to teach social awareness, relational development, and then we've got to elevate making moral, ethical decisions in this world, not out of self, not of our own egoic needs, but on behalf of a broader sense of a beloved community. We're missing that very much, and I think we're missing the opportunities to really utilize the diversity of sports, both in terms of participants and in fans, as an educational tool for justice and equity.
Good advice. Good advice. I'm gonna throw three at you, Greg. See, got you on your toes here. So the first one was a question about why do you think you were told not to date a white girl? Do you think that it had to do anything to do with it being a distraction to the team because others would talk about it and that kind of thing? Well, I'll let you answer that one real quick, and then I'll come back and right back at you.
Let's just be honest. It was just racist.
Right.
There's a distraction. Well, why would it be a distraction? I mean, if I was dating a white girl, I wouldn't bring her to practice. So it wasn't a distraction. It was just racist. I mean, and that's all it was. I'm not going to try to dignify it with an excuse.
The second one was, did you all walk off the field during or before a game or practice ever?
We walked off during practice.
During practice.
During practice.
And then the third one was, do you regret not keeping biology as your major? What would your advice be to athletes who are thinking about pursuing time-demanding majors like biology, but can't do so due to the time constraints of being an athlete?
I think you can do that. I think when we come to Syracuse, we came as student athletes, not just athletes, student athletes. The goal was to get an education, to get a degree. I'm glad to say that we all graduated. when football was taken away, we were determined that we're going to leave Syracuse with something, and we're going to leave with a degree. And yeah, I think that, and that gives me an opportunity to speak to this, because I'd like to give the athletic department, John Bauhack and Herm Fraser, and I'm sure that the chancellor was involved in this, to create this position that Dr. Saletha Willis has. Diversity, culture, climate. When we asked for a Black coach, we were really looking for someone who was currently in Saletha's position. Someone who could set policy. Someone who was at the table when policy was being made.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who could object to policy. And we really wanted someone to have a voice for us. And I just have to give Syracuse and the athletic department credit for doing that. I think that's important. I've had the opportunity to talk to Saletha several times, and I know that's what's on his mind. And I know he talks about the idea of student athletes getting an education. And so I'm encouraged by what we're doing here at Syracuse. And so to that student, if you're a student athlete at Syracuse, I suggest that you make an appointment to see Dr. Willis. And I'm sure that he could assist you in making sure that you're able to achieve your educational and professional goals at Syracuse University and still be able to play sports.
So this is the last question I'm going to take before we get ready to wrap things up. Greg, did you feel like you and your fellow Syracuse 8 teammates were on the ground floor of this social justice movement among athletes? What advice would you offer up to current professional athletes who have picked up the social justice movement and run with it?
I would say yes. I do believe we're on the ground floor. What's important is that you have to. Let me say it in another way. We're talking a little bit about faith. As a young man, of course, as I told you, my goals were to get to Syracuse and be famous and move on pro football and attain all these things. So my prayer was, God, give me this, help me do this, help me get here, help me get there. When it didn't happen and my life changed at Syracuse, I thought, well, those prayers must have been empty or gone unanswered. But then I realized that the boycott was the calling on my life, because it was going to help change the lives of others.
Yep.
It helped change Joe. What greater gift is there than that? And so when I think about our sacrifice, we say sacrifice, but it was a gift. It was a gift to the university. We gave everything we had. No, we're not the biggest donors financially, but what we had in 1970, we gave it all to the university. And so I'm gratified to see where the university is now. I know that there's activism on campus now, student activism, and I can appreciate that. I understand it. But I hope just for a moment, someone would understand that from where I sit, we've come a long way. We've come a long way. We have a Syracuse 8 Courage Award. I've had the opportunity to present it several times. When I look out over that audience and see women's sports, men's sports, the ethnic diversity in the coaching staffs and the coaches, we have a Black head coach in football now. We previously had a Black athletic director in Darryl Gross. So there has been change over time. And so when you, as an athlete, there's more to it than you, all right? I was asked to be Black or an athlete. I chose to be a Black athlete. I chose not to run from my identity, my humanity, or who I was. I wanted to celebrate that through my sport. And if it meant that I had to give up my sport to celebrate that other piece of me, that humanity in me, then it was okay. I'm grateful for it. And I want to pick up on something Joe said. Our biases, if we would all take the time to just look at and assess our biases. But it's work. You have to work at it. I was recently in a board meeting with the School of Ed, and one of our members was a white woman, talked about the deep dive that she was doing, looking at race. And I know her well. And she said to me, as I, go through this, I see that, yes, there's some things I think are racist. There's some things I've said that are racist. But yet it's not the point of demonizing herself, but it was the point that she wanted to understand who she was and where she was, and how does she shed those things? How does she shed those biases? How does she come to grips with that? And I'm sorry if I'm going too long. I'll end it now, but that's where we should be, as human beings, as people on this earth. Yes, there's a difference in skin color, but I bleed orange too.
It's a good color to bleed. It's a good color to bleed. Having said that, that wraps up our Q&A segment. But I do want to just get a couple of minutes or 1.5 minutes each, if we can. I hate to even put a time limit on it, but just some final thoughts, Joe, if you would.
Well, I'm sitting here, I'm deeply moved. I'm deeply moved by Greg's character and who's he become. And I don't think any of us are surprised at who he's become, because that certainly was who he was. Those seeds were always there. But I'm thinking, my thought right now is the fact that it took me 20 years to get where Greg was in 70. And that is that athletic ability and athletic gift, it's never about you. You're to use that gift on behalf. That is a tool. That is a resource to be spread and shared. Yeah. So my thought here, as I think about my other teammates, my white teammates that participated in this, I've spoken out of my own personal reflections and processes, but I would I hope they have engaged in this today and have thought about their own actions. And, as none of us, it's never too late. And we have the world, I think we have America's greatest election coming up this next month. And I think all of us have an opportunity to participate to make the world more fair, more just, more hospitable, make America better. And I would hope at some point all of us could get together, that 1970 team and all of us, and process it.
I want to come. I think it would be great.
I have 4 children, and they're as anti-racist as they could be. They're part of the gift that Greg and 8 other men had given to me. And my grandchildren will be the same way. So I think for all of us that were part of that team, to just do some honest reflection, and it's never too late to make corrective actions. Greg, I just want to say I'd give you a big hug and love you and respect you. And you touch my heart in so many ways, but your grace and maturity as a 19-year-old And as a this-year-old, you're still very, so thank you.
It's awesome. Greg, take us home. Take us home. Give us some final thoughts. Kind of sum up this whole evening, if you could.
Well, Joe, don't make me cry on the podcast, please.
Don't cry, Greg.
I'm really thankful for this evening, and I'm thankful that Joe and I got a chance to share where we were and where we are. And I agree with Joe. I hope that our teammates from 1970 see that no matter where we are, we're all God's children, to use it another way. And we just need to take an honest evaluation of our history and work on not repeating it. And that's what Joe and I are doing. And as soon as this COVID pandemic is over, I plan on getting to Baltimore and sitting down with Joe and seeing how he and I can still be teammates and work on another team. We're on the same team now, but how we can collaborate and do more work together. I really look forward to that. And so I thank Rachel Vassell and the multicultural advancement and the athletic department, and John Wildhack. And John, please say hello to your brother Henry for me. That this I can't. I know I'm a Newhouse grad, but I'm finding it difficult to find the words to express what I'm really feeling deep inside. This has been one of the greatest evenings of my life. It really has been. And before I close, I want to wish my oldest daughter a happy birthday.
Oh, happy birthday. Well, I also am a Newhouse grad, and I've been choked up this whole night. So I'm really glad that you all did the bulk of the talking. It has been such a special night to share with you. I do work in conflict resolution, and I will just end with this thought that whenever we're mediating a process or going in and work with teams in conflict or whatever it is, at the end of the day, it takes exactly what we've kind of done here. It's about a conversation. Most people are conflict averse, and they don't want to spend time talking about the pain or the differences. But that's where the healing is. And I would say this for the athletes in us, if the goal, because every Syracuse University athlete I know goes hard, go orange, right? And so if the goal, the common goal is that humanity that you speak, the common goal is the win-win, then having the conversation is like running drills, right? It's like anything else that we have to do. It's a process to get us to that goal. And in having this conversation tonight, I was so happy to be a part of it because I knew that you all were doing exactly what you were epitomizing, exactly what healing is all about. It's about being willing to be courageous and have a conversation. So I thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm so happy I got to sit in with this because it offered me so much hope. And I think I speak for so many people tonight that your courage, your humility, your honesty, your morality, your empathy, your humanity is so very, very inspiring. I cannot thank you enough for the hope you have given so many that through a willingness to examine ourselves, our biases, our values, as you spoke of, our decentness, we can recognize we are all playing for something far bigger than ourselves. Tonight is a night, as a Syracuse alum, I am so very, very proud. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you, Miko Horn, for remembering me, Rachel Vassell, and Salatha Willis, and Syracuse University Office of Multicultural Advancement. This has been awesome, along with Syracuse Athletics. I'm glad that I was able to get the nod, and I'm crashing you guys' party wherever it is. So sorry. All right. This awesome experience. I want to also thank our viewers for staying with us, and thank you for your constant support. Continue that support right now. And please welcome Rachel Vassell, Assistant Vice President, Office of Multicultural Advancement. Thanks, guys.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much to my fellow alumna, Vera Jones, who answered the call to moderate this dynamic conversation tonight. Many thanks also to Greg and Joe for your willingness to discuss an extremely tumultuous and monumental period in SU history, as well as some painful personal memories. Your valuable reflection on our past and assessment of our present will aid in fostering a more equitable community for all Syracuse University students. We're extremely grateful to the Syracuse 8 who courageously stood for change 50 years ago and continue to be catalysts for change today. Thank you for the personal sacrifices that you made for the greater good. We honor you tonight. I also want to acknowledge John Wildhack and his staff in athletics who without hesitation agreed to collaborate with my team in multicultural advancement to make this conversation a reality. In honor of the Syracuse 8, please help us to cement their legacy and support underserved students at Syracuse University by making a donation to the Our Time Has Come Syracuse 8 Endowed Scholarship. This scholarship was established in 2008 by SU alumni led by football legend Art Monk. The first Syracuse 8 scholarship was awarded in 2011, and we'd love to increase the number of Syracuse 8 scholars with your help, especially during this time of racial unrest and division. Please make a gift tonight by clicking the donation link in the chat box, or make a donation on the Multicultural Advancement giving page during Boost the Q's, Syracuse University's official day of giving, which kicks off tomorrow. You may also honor the Syracuse 8 by purchasing a copy of Leveling the Playing Field, the story of the Syracuse 8, published in 2015 by the Syracuse University Press. Leveling the Playing Field is available at the SU bookstore, and a link to the bookstore website can be located in the chat box. A portion of the proceeds from each book sold will go directly to the Syracuse 8 Scholarship. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Saletha Willis. In July of this year, Saletha joined athletics as the Associate Athletic Director of Diversity, Culture, and Climate. In this role, Saletha will lead the DEI practices of the athletics division and is already proven to be a valuable addition to the university leadership team and a tremendous resource for our student athletes. Thank you for your good work, Saletha. It has been a pleasure partnering with you on this event.
Thank you, Rachel, and good evening, everyone. Tonight, we have the benefit of hindsight. Through the eyes of Greg and Joe, who have graciously done the work to cast aside ego, assess self, and be vulnerable enough to have a candid conversation about perceptions, actions, consequences, advances that led to and followed the Syracuse 8 football boycott in 1970. Listening to the words of Greg and Joe, I am reminded of a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." The creation of, and my appointment to the position, Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Climate, and Culture, is a clear indication that the events of the past, though hard to digest in the moment, were not in vain. We recognize that student athletes do more than just play sports, and the inequalities experienced, whether on campus, the local community, or around the country, directly affect their lives and the sports for which they participate. In athletics, we are committed to harnessing every resource to create an equitable, inclusive, and safe environment. To do so, we have engaged student athletes, Orange Athletics alumni, coaches, and staff in an ongoing effort to develop programmatic initiatives to address cultural competence, bias, equity, and inclusion through required training and education, outlets for community outreach, and the support and recruitment of a diverse community of coaches, staff members, and interns. Looking forward, we will continue to highlight and acknowledge trailblazers like the Syracuse 8 and the Syracuse history that help inform our steps and guide our future. In closing, in honor of the late Justice Ginsburg, I leave you with a quote from Learned Hand, a former New York State judge. The spirit of liberty that imbues our Constitution must reside first and foremost in the hearts of the men and women who compose the great nation, our great nation, a community where the least shall be heard and considered side by side with the greatest. As we interact within and serve the Syracuse community and our neighbors within the city of Syracuse, we must keep this wisdom in the forefront of our hearts and minds. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I wish you and your families peace, health, and happiness. Go Orange.